Everyone keeps saying the same thing. Men are lonely, men are isolated, men are falling apart quietly behind closed doors while nobody notices. And sure, that's a real conversation. But somewhere in the middle of it, something got skipped. Because if you actually talk to women right now, not the headlines, not the hashtags, the actual women in your life, you'll hear a different sentence. I've never felt more alone. So which is it? Are men the lonely ones? Or are women? Because both stories are being told right now, at the same time, by different people. And somehow, almost nobody is asking how both of them can be true. That's what this is actually about, not who has it worse, not a competition nobody wins. But what actually changed underneath both stories that made everyone, regardless of gender, feel more disconnected than they've ever felt before. Stay with me, because the answer is more uncomfortable than men bad or women bad. It's something neither side wants to admit. A few years ago, the story was simple. Men don't have friends, men don't talk about their feelings, men die younger, alone in silence. That narrative exploded. Surgeons General called it an epidemic. Headlines ran with it. Every podcast bro had a theory. Meanwhile, quietly in the background, another story was building. Women with bigger friend groups than any generation before them. More group chats, more girls' trips, more emotional vocabulary than they've ever had access to, and still saying they'd never felt more unseen, not unfriended, unseen. That's the part people keep missing. Loneliness isn't one thing. There's social loneliness, not having anyone around, and there's emotional loneliness, being surrounded by people and still feeling like nobody actually knows you. Men, statistically, struggle more with the first one. Women, statistically, are drowning in the second one, which means the headlines weren't lying. They were just only telling half the story. And that's where the real question begins. Here's something that sounds backwards until you sit with it. Women, on paper, have never been more connected. Bigger friend groups, constant texting, group chats that never sleep. A follower count in the thousands. And yet, ask any woman in her 20s or 30s how many of those people she could actually call at 2 a.m. Watch the number drop fast. Here's what happened. Modern friendship got wide. It didn't get deep. You can have 40 people who like your Instagram story and still not have one person who knows what's actually going on in your head. Pew Research asked Americans a simple question in 2024. Who do you turn to when things get hard? Women said friends more than men did, 54% versus 38%. Women said their mothers more, 54 versus 42. Women said extended family more, 44 versus 26. So on paper, women have more people to lean on. But here's the part nobody talks about. Having more people to call isn't the same as feeling less alone. A lot of those connections are conditional, friendships that exist inside a group chat and nowhere else. Friendships one bad opinion away from a slow fade, friendships built on shared content instead of shared history. You can be added to 15 group chats and still feel like nobody would notice if you disappeared for a week. That's not paranoia. Therapists have a name for it. The difference between having an audience and having intimacy. Validation replaced vulnerability. Likes replaced check-ins. And almost nobody noticed when that happened. But something else changed at the exact same time. Now here's where the title starts to make sense. Men didn't fix loneliness. They just stopped fighting it. Sounds bleak. Stay with it, because it explains a lot. At some point, a huge number of men, especially younger ones, quietly lowered the bar. Not because they don't want connection, because chasing it stopped feeling worth it. Fewer close friends became the new normal. And instead of grieving that, a lot of men just adapted. Hobbies instead of heart-to-hearts. The gym instead of group therapy. Online communities where you can show up, contribute, disappear, and never once explain how you're actually feeling. Gaming groups where the friendship is real, but the conversation never goes past the surface. Career obsession as a socially acceptable replacement for connection. Because I'm just focused on work sounds a lot better than I don't know how to let people in. Pew found men and women now have roughly the same number of close friends, but men reach out to those friends far less often. Less texting, less calling, less initiating. Not because the friendship isn't real, because somewhere along the way, a lot of men decided solitude was safer than the risk of needing someone and being let down. Here's the part that matters. This isn't men winning at loneliness. It's men adapting to it the way you adapt to cold water, not by warming it up, by going numb. And numb doesn't mean happy. It means the pain stopped registering as loudly. That difference changes everything about how we should be reading this whole conversation. Let's run a thought experiment for a second. Picture someone from 1995. Pull them out of that decade and hand them a phone. Show them a dating app. Explain the concept. An infinite scroll of human beings ranked by a photo and a swipe. They wouldn't understand it as dating. They'd understand it as a catalog. And that's exactly what it became. Not a way to meet one person, a catalog with a next button built directly into the experience. And when there's always a next, commitment starts to feel like settling. That's not an accident. That's the entire design. Ghosting became normal, not cruel, efficient. Why explain why it's not working when you can just vanish and open the app again? Comparison became constant, every match measured against the highlight reel of the last 20. Women often describe the exhaustion of being one option among 50. Real emotional effort spent on someone who's simultaneously talking to 4 other people just like her. Men often describe the opposite exhaustion, message after message into a void. Watching attention concentrate on a tiny percentage of profiles while everyone else gets ignored. 2 completely different experiences of the exact same system, and both experiences produce the exact same output. Distrust, fatigue, a quiet suspicion that no one is actually looking for something real anymore, just auditioning for something better. Infinite choice was supposed to make finding the right person easier. Instead, it made everyone a little more disposable and a little more afraid to fully show up. But dating isn't the whole story. Here's a question nobody really asks. What if the problem was never finding the right person? What if the problem is that nobody agrees on what right even means anymore? Because expectations didn't stay still while all of this was happening. They climbed. Self-improvement culture told an entire generation, heal first, become your best self, know your worth. Good advice individually. Stacked together, it quietly rewired what people expect from a partner, not just someone to build a life with, someone who meets you at a level of emotional fluency most people, including the one judging, haven't reached themselves. Therapy language went mainstream. Boundaries, emotional availability, secure attachment, real tools. But increasingly used less like tools and more like a checklist for disqualifying people faster than ever. One slightly avoidant text, and the whole thing gets diagnosed instead of discussed. The more perfect a relationship is expected to be, the harder it becomes to feel satisfied inside a real one. And then social media added another layer on top of all of it. Because it's not just relationships getting compared, it's everything. Curated apartments, curated bodies, curated day in my life videos that leave out every boring, lonely hour in between. Engagement announcements land in your feed the same week your situationship stops texting back. Influencer couples perform intimacy for a living. And audiences absorb it as a baseline instead of a highlight reel. Parasocial relationships filled the gap for a lot of people. Feeling emotionally close to someone who has no idea you exist. It's connection-shaped, but it isn't connection. Here's the phrase worth sitting with. Comparison doesn't just steal your happiness in the moment, it quietly resets what you think a normal life is supposed to look like. The internet made connection cheaper, which also made it easier to replace. So even people who are objectively doing fine, decent friends, decent relationship, decent life, end up feeling like they're falling behind some invisible standard that was never real to begin with, which leads to the biggest misunderstanding of all. Here's where we bring it all together. Up to this point, it might sound like men and women are just experiencing the exact same collapse from 2 different angles. Close, but not quite right. They're experiencing 2 different kinds of hunger. Women, broadly, are conditioned early on to build emotional fluency, to talk about feelings, to check in, to notice when someone's off. So when that depth isn't reciprocated by friends, by partners, by anyone, it registers immediately, sharply, like a missing ingredient. Men, broadly, are conditioned towards self-reliance. Handle it. Don't be a burden. Figure it out alone. So when connection is missing, it doesn't always register as loneliness right away. It registers as tiredness, numbness. I'm just busy until it doesn't anymore. The Pew data actually shows this almost perfectly if you read it closely. Men and women report feeling lonely at nearly identical rates. 16% of men, 15% of women, practically the same number. But how they experience it, describe it, and respond to it, that's where the split happens. Women feel the absence of depth. Men feel the absence of a way to even name what's missing. Same wound, different location, different language for describing the pain. And once you see it that way, the whole "who has it worse" argument starts to fall apart. Because it was never really a competition. It was two different symptoms of the exact same disease. But none of this means one side has it easier. So let's kill the idea that anyone here is winning, because they're not. Men who've adapted to isolation by going numb aren't thriving. They're surviving on autopilot, functional, productive, quietly empty in a way that's hard to even name, let alone fix. Women who've built wide networks of surface-level connection aren't thriving either. They're exhausted, performing openness in every group chat, while privately wondering if anyone would actually notice the performance stop. Different coping mechanisms, same destination. A world where everyone looks connected on the outside, and almost nobody feels it on the inside. The opposite of loneliness isn't company, it's being understood. And maybe that's the actual crisis, not male loneliness, not female loneliness, the normalization of both. An entire ecosystem, dating apps, social feed, self-improvement culture, hustle culture, that all, independently, without anyone planning it, pushes people further from each other while making it look like the opposite is happening. Nobody sat down and designed this. It just happened, piece by piece, app by app. And maybe that's the real tragedy. So go back to the very first question. Are men lonelier than ever? Or have they simply gotten better at hiding it? Are women lonelier than ever? Or have their expectations risen faster than modern relationships can keep up? Here's what seems true underneath all of it. Men didn't escape loneliness. They found a version of themselves that doesn't have to feel it as often, which isn't the same thing as solving it. Women didn't suddenly become isolated overnight. The definition of connection changed underneath them, and the old kind, deep, unfiltered, inconvenient, time-consuming connection got quietly replaced by something faster and thinner. Maybe loneliness isn't becoming more common. Maybe we've just become better at hiding it. And maybe that's the loneliest part of all. So, what do you think? Have men really moved on? Or have they just learned to live with something they never actually solved? And are women truly lonelier than ever? Or have expectations simply changed faster than reality has been able to keep up? I'd genuinely like to hear where you land on this. Drop it below.